1800s. So I hope that you are doing well, that all is well with you and your family. And I just wanted to kind of come and talk a little bit about organizers in the 1800s. Hopefully you are doing well. And we had a chance yesterday to talk about Martin Luther King's grandfather. We had a chance to talk about Reverend Adam Daniel Williams. We talked about him and some of the amazing things, some of the incredible things that he was doing in Georgia in the 1890s and early 1900s. But it wasn't just him alone. There were a lot of people working and organizing in African American communities that are really kind of implementing some of the things we talk about when it comes to comedic history. So I want to kind of jump in and talk about that. And first of all, I want to say thank you for those who've been supporting me and buying the books. And thank you for taking a look at Religion of the Black Land. It is available on Amazon. Please take a look at it. It talks about Kemetic and Cushite theology. We talk a lot about religion and a lot of the things that we've done as a people, whether you're going back to ancient Kush or ancient Kemet or places in West Africa, South, all around the world, you find that a lot of things we do with respect to our concept of God has allowed us to develop societies, even connecting ourselves with one source and being able to see ourselves in each other has allowed us to develop societies that last for a long period of time. So we're going to touch on that topic today as we got to touch on what we do with respect to religion. We're going to talk about that, but I appreciate you checking my book on Amazon and take a look at it. It's on Kindle and in paperback, and I pray that you take a look at it. Thank you so much for those who are doing that. So I want to talk a little bit today. About Elias Camp Morris. And as we talk about him, I want to talk a little bit about him and just with respect to some of the things that were happening in the 1800s. A lot of times when we think about religion, right, we have a certain perspective of it. But when you really look and examine some of our most dedicated leaders, some of our most dynamic leaders, some of our longest lasting societies and organizations have been surrounded around religion. We've been able to come around and not even from like, a kind of a fanciful way, but literally seriously looking at our belief in relation to God. And I think that's something special that we have and a unique way in which people and people from West Africa, people from different parts of Africa interact with one another and how we've developed our societies. The whole idea of the concept of the divine and how we relate to God, how we relate to religion, I think it's very significant. I think we today, poo-poo religion because some of the bad things people did in the name of religion doesn't mean that we should throw out the whole concept of God, because these are ideas that go well beyond many of the crazy people and the mean things that people have done over the past 500 years. Our ideas go back millions of years, really thousands, hundreds of thousands, probably even millions of years in terms of our concept of the divine and something beyond what we are. So that whole idea of looking at the divine and religion is significant. And I want to kind of touch on a couple of things as we talk about people. We're going to talk about Elias Camp Morris, and he was someone who lived in the 1800s and early 1900s. And he was an organizer. So we're going to kind of jump into him. But I want to make that whole point that just because some people in the very recent past, in the past few hundred years have done bad things in the name of religion or certain religion, doesn't mean that we have to throw out our whole concept of who God is and how we relate to one another within that construct, because that's something that is African, uniquely us, that's a part of our ancestors that has a lot to do with what we do and a lot to do with our culture. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. And I'm going to walk through this resource. And I mentioned yesterday, the resource that I was going through yesterday on Adam Daniel Williams, Martin Luther King's grandfather, that is up on the site for members. And thank you for members who are paid members, $4.99 a month. I very much appreciate that. That's up. You can download it. I'm working on this resource. I haven't put this resource up yet, but I wanted to talk about today, but I am working on it. So we're going to talk a little bit about Elias Camp Morris. And I don't know if you know of him, if you've heard about him God bless you. Hope you're doing well, Poet Williams. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining. I very much appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining. I don't know if you've heard about Elias Camp Morris, and I hadn't really heard about him until I started reading and researching. And when you start reading, especially when you start reading things in the 1800s, you'll find that a lot of people, a lot of Black people did a lot of things with respect to just organizing and writing things down. And talking about things. They did a lot of things with respect to a lot of organizing and talking about what they were doing. It wasn't just one particular person. It wasn't, and a lot of their names like Henry McNeil Turner and Elias Camp Morris. And, we may remember people like Richard Allen, but there's so many of them that were doing things. And as you know, right after slavery, obviously, one of the things that was paramount on African-American people's mind was one, finding your family, right? Being able to set up and trying to find family that had been lost and separated from the horrors of slavery, things that happened to people. But it was also setting up churches and educational institutions. The whole idea of having churches that we owned and operated, that we organized on ourselves, and setting up educational institutions, because obviously we weren't allowed to read, that was a significant focus, if you will. And you start to think about how people organized around it and what they did around it. It was significant. And this man his name comes up, Elias Camp Morris. He is a contemporary of Martin Luther King's grandfather. He's around during the same times. And in many ways, he was more famous than Martin Luther King's grandfather, because he was kind of working on a national stage in a National Baptist Convention. And it really, as I read some of his book, he wrote a book, and I'll kind of point it out to you right here. So you can see it. It's a 1901 book, Sermons, Addresses, and Reminiscences, an Important Correspondence, with picture gallery of eminent ministers and scholars. So it's a mouthful. But he wrote this book in 1901, and he talks a lot about his role in the National Baptist Convention, as well as, how they organized and what his focus was with respect to education. And when you start to think about it, you start to realize it's not just one person. A lot of African-American people, just years after slavery, were doing amazing, literally within months after slavery and very shortly after slavery, we're doing a lot of things in terms of organizing to vote, in terms of organizing, trying to organize, working institutions, and eventually organize unions and many, many things. And a lot of the stuff we hear or we don't hear is because there was so much of an attack, as you know, whether it's from lynching or mass murders or busting up unions, burning down churches, burning down educational institutions, burning down black schoolhouses in various places from Washington, D.C. to the South, all kinds of places like that. There was a concerted effort to make black people afraid and to tear this away. And when you put that all in context and you see somebody like Elias Camp Morris and Martin Luther King's grandfather and Ida B. Wells, you start to say, these people are doing amazing things. They're doing amazing things in the face of incredible odds. So let's just talk about him a little bit. As I mentioned, he lived in 1800s. And he was, if you think about the National Baptist Convention, which essentially is the organization of National Baptists, and it's kind of gone, in various ways over its history. But, one of the things that it has done is contributed a lot to educational institutions. So, for example, here, Arkansas Baptist College was founded in 1884 by the Colored Baptists of Arkansas. And as it was founded, there was other churches like Mount Zion Baptist Church and Little Rock. They were helping to develop a lot of schools. I mean, you had people who were just years, decades after slavery, putting their monies and their resources together to help people go to school. And I think about this from an organizational standpoint. And as you're listening to it, if you listen, as we kind of walk through this, ask yourself the question. Let's ask ourselves the question: how difficult would it be, and how difficult is it to do it today? And I'm not saying that there aren't large organizations, but some of the organizations that we find even years ago were very active and very successful and did a lot for a lot of people, changed a lot of people's lives, even though some of the institutions that they may have developed have since gone away, or some of them are still in existence. How could we have an active organization centered around education and theology today that's nationwide, right? So it's something to kind of think about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of how we can activate around it. So you start to hear the National Baptist Convention, which is the organization of National Baptists, Black Baptists, right, who are, galvanizing around education, right? They're doing a lot around education. And Elias Camp Morris, he was the founder of that school. So he was the founder of Arkansas Baptist College. And he was a fierce advocate for education. He was somebody who was significantly contributed and committed to Baptists and his denomination and for education for Black people. He was somebody who was on the forefront. And so it would have been interesting to hear some of these people talk, because we don't have audio to know what they sounded like, right? But apparently he was a dynamic preacher and a dynamic person. And as he starts to talking, he is there in the even in the early 1900s when the Red Summer of 1919 took place, and that horrible race massacre that Ida B. Wells wrote about, which I do have on my website for people who are paid members who are part of the Arkansas race riot, who are ancestors at the ancestor level. Ida B. Wells wrote about that. There's so many things that happened in 1919. This man was there on the ground in Helena, Arkansas, not far from Elaine, Arkansas, where this took place, helping to calm things down, helping to save people's lives, helping people from stopping getting lynched. He was right there on the ground doing it. A lot of the people who were leaders were on the ground leaders. they were not just people who were, in some pie in the sky. They were on the ground leaders doing a lot of things. So he starts to develop things in Arkansas, and he eventually becomes, part of the state convention. So he begins to become somebody who becomes a leader in Arkansas. And by becoming a leader in Arkansas, he starts to stand out nationally amongst Baptists, black, Negro Baptists, if you will. He starts to stand out around black Baptists because of the things that he's doing in Arkansas. And we think about it, he mentions here, at the state convention of Arkansas in Baptist, that he was chosen as a secretary. And then he was eventually chosen as the president of the convention. So he begins to be the president of the state organization of Arkansas for Baptists, for black Baptists, right? And then he ends up, talking about, one of his most valuable claims, if you will, is that when he started this, and he was elected to the presidency at the Arkansas state level from a Baptist standpoint, there was a membership of only 30,000. That's how many people were a part of his congregation or the whole state of Arkansas in terms of black Baptists. It was 30,000 within his organization. And then they didn't have one single educational institute that was operated by black Baptists in the state of Arkansas. And then he talked about, as of today, as I'm writing this book, that the membership has grown to over 70,000 people, and that there are 5 high schools and 1 college. And when I start to think about, imagine that over a few year period of time, you take over an organization, a state, and there are 30,000 people in it. And then you help to grow that to 70,000 people. And from a situation where they have 0 educational institutions, and you end up having 5 high schools and 1 college. Because a lot of times when we think about, black Baptists and we think about organizations, we think about the black colleges, the HBCUs that were developed by people like him and a lot of religious organizations and organizations, period, in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s. But we don't think about the high schools. We don't think about other schools that they were developing that fed into college, right? A lot of people may not have had a chance to go to college. They may have been in different situations, but they also supported other types of educational development for children that were beyond or outside of college. We got how much that impacts somebody's life. Stopping and thinking for a second, what did that do for some child who got to go to a high school in the 1800s and early 1900s that this man helped to start, and the black Baptists in Arkansas helped to start? Maybe they went to college, maybe they didn't. What did that do for that person's life? What did it do for that person's children and grandchildren's lives? We started to see how people were working on the ground, having an impact at institutions in ways we never know. And I want to give them some love today. I want to give them their shine. I want to recognize them today, because these are people who changed somebody's life. It could have changed my life. They could have been, somebody who helped somebody who learned something or learned how to read, and they got a different kind of job or a better job, or they taught their grandchildren how to do something, and their grandchildren had opportunities that they never had. Just like, Adam Daniel Williams versus Martin Luther King, or Adam Daniel Williams' father, Martin Luther King's great grandfather, and the opportunities Dr. King had. You never know what the seeds you're doing, how they grow. And so I want to recognize this man today as he's doing that. And he goes on to talk about, as he is growing bigger, if you will, in Arkansas, he begins to get on a national stage. And in September of 1895, there was a famous meeting, if you will, a meeting that took place where Martin Luther King's grandfather, right here, Martin Luther King's grandfather was at this meeting. And this meeting was in September of 1895, and it was in Atlanta, Georgia. And this is where the National Baptist Convention was going to kind of take on its fully formalized form. It was going to join between 3 other organizations that were earlier organizations focused on missionary work and education and so forth, and young people were going to join together to become the National Baptist Convention, right? And so this was taking place in Atlanta. And at this meeting in 1895, Martin Luther King's grandfather was there. Adam Daniel Williams was at this meeting, along with other delegates that were there, who were looking to elect and to form the National Baptist Convention. And it's interesting, out of all the leaders, there were all the dynamic things that Adam Daniel Williams were doing, and all the other people were there. The leaders, the delegates, elected Elias Camp Morris as their leader. This is the man they elected. This is the man, out of all the people who were doing amazing things in Georgia and various places, they elected him from Arkansas to lead the National Baptist Convention and to be his president. And he would lead the organization for well over 27 years, and it would have well over 1 million people who are part of the National Baptist Convention. And stop for a second. So he's getting elected. He's leading this organization for 27 years until 1922, just before his death. And there are well over 1 million people in this organization. Stopping for a second and thinking, early 1900s, 1 million people, and really 1.4 million. You can go into about 1.5 million. You look at some of the records that are associated with it. You have well over 1 million people, black people, a part of the National Baptist Convention. This man is elected president, and people are working. And you end up having them develop college after college and to really focus on education and to try to expand this organization. And there are a lot of things that happen. There are a lot of challenges. And you're doing this in the midst of Jim Crow. You're doing this in the midst of lynching. You're doing it in the midst of all types of counter programs to rip apart black organizations, but they still did it. And so when I think about it, I kind of marvel at that and think, wow, look at what they were doing in the early. What would it take today for us to pull up, an organization that had over 1 million people in it, and it was focused on education and religion? Now, I know there are some things that are like that now, and there are a lot of different, aspects, but it feels like some of the things that maybe we're doing now are not having the same type of impact. It feels like some of our children are impacted more by things they see on social media or TikTok more than they are education, more than they are reading, more than they are even religion, and even having a morality, even having understanding that right is right and wrong is wrong. There are some people who are just, their moral code is to get over. And that's what they talk about, and that's what they laugh about. It seems like we're going like moralists, if you will. And I talk about that, and I'll share this information. I was at a church one time. I went to a church, and this was a mega church. I won't say where. And the church was in a neighborhood, in a black neighborhood. And I'm walking to the church, and I had to park kind of far away because there's a lot of people in the church. And I'm walking there, and I remember having to walk over needles, right? And I remember as I'm driving there, I see, liquor stores almost on every other corner. And I just think about it as I'm stepping over needles in the parking lot, and this place where I had to park to get to the place. I was wondering, how much of an impact does this institution, who has thousands of members, a lot of people go to this church, have on the children and the people? Like, there's some little girl who lives in this housing area right here who is impacted by the institutions in this neighborhood. And what has more of an impact on her and the children? Is it the liquor store or the churches? Is it the liquor store or the organizations that are trying to push good, right? And sometimes it feels like the liquor stores are winning. Even a lot of our athletes and a lot of our entertainers, you go on their social media and they're just drinking alcohol, right? But the reality is a lot of kids experience it in a very negative way. Their parents participate in a very negative way. It's not like a fun, just a party. It's a lot of negativity, and they don't grow up with education. A lot of our kids can't read. I know I was talking about that earlier. There's some data to show that 54% of Americans, period, from age 16 to 70, read below a 6th grade level. More than half, period. And those numbers are staggering when you start to break it down in terms of African Americans and Latino Americans. They become staggering. That's a ridiculous number. Many of our children can't read, even on a 6th grade level when they're beyond 6th grade. Many of them on their grade aren't reading. Where are our leaders to say you can't have a future if you're not reading? Where are our people to say this is a crisis, we need to do something about it? And I'm making the point that a lot of our people in the past recognize that and put that as a major goal. They put that out there. So he is talking about, I want to share one of his sermons that he preached. This is something he talked about back in 1894. This was a sermon. And he's talking about, the biblical text he's talking about is the light of the body is the eye. And therefore, if thine eye be single, the whole body should be full of light. But if thine eye be evil, the whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light in thee is dark and be darkness, how great is that darkness? So he's talking about a famous quote from the Bible, as you probably know, whether or not what your eye are really focused on, what you are really focused on, and is that intent evil? Or is it good? Is it dark or is it light? What really is your focus and your intent? And he talks about that for years, people have leveled a charge at Negro Baptists, at Black Baptists, basically saying that, that they were not smart and holding Black Baptists up to ridicule, right? And he said, this charge of making fun of or, beleaguering and talking about Black Baptists in particular is a ridiculous charge, and he said, and this is stood before the world for generations, much like the way they talk about Black people now and other people, right? He said, but I tell you that the charge was never true of us as a whole, and that from the days of slavery until now, the leading Baptist preachers and the intelligent progressive element in our churches have composed the vanguards of God's army among the Negro Christians of the world. He's saying we stand out. we're not looking at all things we're doing. And the only reason I assign for the ignorance of those who thus falsely charge us is that their eyes are evil. And I thought about this when I read this. He's saying, a lot of the people who look at a whole race of people and make these charges against them, they're coming from an evil mindset. They're coming from a place of bias. They're coming from a place of evil, which I think is a really good way for us to look at it, because it's a difference between not having something and not being able to have it. And a lot of times people would charge things of people in terms of ability, which is just ridiculous. All that we need is focus. And there are a lot of people, plenty of people of black, all kinds of races who are leading the way and doing amazing things. We just got to make sure that not too many of us, you fall behind. That many of us go with as many as possible, that it's not just a percentage. We have a lot of people leading the way, but there's work to be done, right? And people who make charges that it can't be done or whatever, I think it's a ridiculous charge, and I think that it's coming from an evil perspective. We just have to make it a priority. And as I started thinking about it, this is one of the things that Elias Camp Morris did throughout his career. He made education a priority for the National Baptist Convention. He said, we're not going to just have people where our preachers are quote unquote educated. I want an educated congregation. I want everybody to know. I want the schools such as Shaw University and Spelman Seminary College and various places like that, Roger Williams. I want this to be on the mouths of everybody who's a part of our organization, all the hundreds of thousands and over 1 million people. I want them to know about our educational institutions. I want them to support them. I want them to go to them. I want us to understand that it's not just about, what we're doing from a missionary standpoint. It's about us educating our people. It's about us making sure that we can move ourselves forward. So as he talks about this, he becomes a staunch advocate for developing schools and developing colleges and for education in the National Baptist Convention. So it's not just one thing. He's doing many things with respect to that. And it's making a difference, right? It made a difference in somebody's life. If you develop an institution and it stays around even for just 20 years and it impacts hundreds or thousands of people, you've made a dent. You've made an impact in it. And as I mentioned, we're talking back in the 1800s. We're talking about, well over 100 years ago, obviously. And we talk about them focusing on issues, that the same issues we need to focus on today. And I wish we had leaders, right? And maybe you and I are leaders. Maybe we are the ones doing it. I wish we had the leaders who were leaders of, million plus people, right? Who have 1 million plus followers, coming out all the time, talking about education, coming out and telling the children, you got 1 million followers, tell the children to read. Read on your social media account. Talk to them about why they need to be educated, because a lot of our kids don't know. They know more silly things and they follow people just for silliness. People just giving them candy. And I think about the leaders who were around in the 1800s, early 1900s, who understood this. There were people who were coming out of slavery in many different ways, and they were focused on the priorities. They were focused on family. They were focused on God and having institutions that they run. And they were focused on education. They were focused on God, family, and education. They were focused on, you can see that from what they did. When you go and read, these are the institutions that we poured our blood, sweat, and tears into after slavery. Once we got the chance, these are the institutions we did. And from a church standpoint, they were some of the first institutions where we had full control, where we could express ourselves the way we wanted to express, which is probably one of the reasons why the Baptists grew so much, because they were pretty expressive. We could express ourselves the way we wanted to, whether you had music or not, whether you had instruments or not, you could express yourself. And the music, the singing that was there, the expression was probably holy, would probably move your heart. If you thought about it, I remember Frederick Douglass talking about in his book, Narrative of Life of Frederick Douglass, he talks about being able to hear people in the woods when they had to walk from one plantation to another to get supplies, singing. And he said the heart-wrenching songs and the melodies that they were singing, he said it was so touching, so out of this world that he couldn't even give words. So if you remember reading that part, he couldn't even describe it. And this is a man who was great with words, and that's a great book. He said, I can't even describe to you the feeling or the tone to capture what was in the heart of what they were saying. It was really that deep. He said, but as I think about it, a tear is running down my face and dropping onto the paper that I'm writing as I think about what the people were singing and the way those voices sound. When you think about that from a church perspective, a lot of our ancestors, that's the first place they were able to go and to have their own control, to have, black preachers and black leaders and black women doing things and organization. And that's one of the reasons why it was often attacked. Why a lot of people, because a lot of organization took place in churches. A lot of organizing took place in schools. A lot of organizing took place in historically black colleges. Even when you think about the Montgomery Boys Boycott, that was a women's council, and that was taking place in Montgomery, Alabama, and at an HBCU, developing the bills that they were going to pass out to tell people to stay off the buses. A lot of that organization took place in educational institutions and in church institutions. And I think there's something to our spirit. I think there's something to us being able to express ourselves and understand our connection with God that allows us to tap into an energy and a force that moves us beyond the things that we think we can and cannot do. And I think that that's something that we've lost, that somehow we think today that we are grown or more sophisticated and we can organize around economics and not around spirituality. And that economics is enough to move forward, but it doesn't seem to be tapping into our children. It doesn't seem to be making them want to read. It doesn't seem to be creating a better economic situation for the masses, for the next generation, even though we're focusing a lot on economics. I think we need to focus on the whole spirit. And here he talks about in his sermon, he's talking about many of the colleges that they're associated with, whether it was Shaw University or Richmond Theological Seminary or Lehman University or Benedict College and Bishop College. He's talking about all these colleges that the National Baptist Convention was associated with and that he wanted people to be aware of and to support in the many things that they were doing in terms of their contributions. So as I think about it, I start to think, wow, look at our educators and our leaders in the 1800s. Look at how they were willing to stand up in the face of a lot of things that were going on. Many of them were not well off. Many of them were not like rich people. They may have been a little better than some people, but a lot of them weren't. A lot of them were on the ground focusing on things that we need. So I just wanted to share that. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below to see what you think about things that we need to do to kind of move forward. And I wanted to, Holmes, and we can add the pharmacy into the mix because, I want to read some of the comments because I think this is significant. Instead of focusing on the masses, focus on raising warriors, all right? People who have a vision like Ella Baker. I think that's important. And I'm curious, Tootie Ahmad, as we think about raising the people who are going to have kind of levers of power, how is it that we do that in a way that affects still enough people and a decent amount of people to actually move the community forward. So I love what you're saying, that's a significant point. And spirituality is what we need, ceremony, ritual, not. Now, I've been thinking about that from a Rites of Passage program, and I'd love to hear what you think from a Rites of Passage program. I got a chance to witness some things as well as to hear some people talk about Rites of Passage programs. One gentleman was telling me about a program that was done, and he was talking to a man in his area where they had rites of passage programs starting at like 5 years old, especially for the boys, with their boys and girls, but especially for the boys, things they had to do that were like catching a bird with their bare hands and running through their area and showing the people in their family how they caught this bird and being able to take it back to their mother, and the mother saying, a young man is in the village, now go out and get your gifts. And these were things that young children did at 5 and 6 years old as a part of the ceremony this gentleman was telling me about. That develops so much in you. How do we develop some of these ceremonies? Because I think one of the benefits of African spirituality is that it nurtures characteristics in a very intentional way, in a very specific way, to bring about characteristics of manhood, of respect, of womanhood, of discipline. It's not just kind of like haphazardly. It really seems like there's a lot of thought put into it. You're going to be a man, you're going to be a woman, and there's certain characteristics and parts of your character that you need to develop, and we're going to put you through these things to help you develop that character. And I think that's a significant thing. So Geek Town, okay. So I appreciate that. So we've been organizing, acting around Tootie Ahmad. Okay. I'd love to hear more what you're doing and how we kind of move forward. Is the Black community impacted more by the church or liquor store? Yeah. I think that was something that just struck me as I was stepping over the needles and walking to it. And now I ask the question, are our children, whether they're black or white or wherever they are they impacted more by leaders who teach them things that they need to do to live successfully in the 21st century? Or are they impacted more by silly things on TikTok? Are they impacted more by TikTok or by things that actually help them? And when I see it and I look at kids and work with kids, I see so many kids who don't even understand what it's going to take in an economy, as we think about economy, right? In an economy in the 21st century where you're just being able to read at a certain level, it may not be enough because computers are going to be able to do it. You're going to have to be able to use the computers as resources. You're going to have to be able to do something more and special in order to get paid for the value that you bring, whether you're creating your own company or you have a job. You're going to have to bring something more to the table or somebody else is going to do it. And I don't think our kids are getting it. I think they're laughing at silly things on TikTok. The TikTok is having more of an educational or negative educational impact than the things that are supposed to help our kids in terms of leaders who will help them. So that's just kind of my thought around it. And I'd love to hear more of what you're talking about in terms of just some of the spirituality and some of your comments. Please put that down below because I want to continue this conversation. If nothing more than if we do it, right? If we start to set the example for people around us and even just put this out there, the education is significant, the spirituality is significant. And I think that there's nothing that I've seen, and you can tell me what you think, nothing that organizes us and brings us together like spirituality or something of a higher cost. You know, when the horrible things happen with respect to George Floyd, and that put us together in a significant way. But even beyond that horrible thing that happened and is killing, the other ways that we get together when we develop large, long-standing societies, it's around religion and our concept of God. It goes deeper. And it's not just one surface kind of concept. There are layers to this. And I think that's one of the things that African spirituality contributes, is looking at the layers and being intentional about development. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to be coming back with more. I really appreciate it and hope to talk to you soon. Talk to you later.